Find the derivative of f of t equals 3 sine to the fourth of 2t times cosine cubed of 2t. F of t here is the product of two functions with a constant, 3, sine to the fourth of 2t times cosine cubed of 2t. And therefore, we're going to make use of the product rule here. But before we do that, let's rewrite sine to the fourth of 2t means the sine of 2t, quantity to the fourth. Cosine cubed of 2t means cosine of 2t and then quantity cubed. It's important to write it that way to know the order in which to take the derivative. You actually start with the outermost function with those, which is the power. Overall, the derivative f prime of t will be a product rule. We'll start with the derivative of the first. We'll bring the power down, leave the inside alone, subtract 1 from the power, and then multiply by the derivative of the inside to complete the chain rule. The derivative of sine is cosine of 2t, and then multiply by the derivative of its inside to finish the double chain rule. Since the inside of the trig function isn't just a t, it's a 2t, the derivative of that will be a 2. That's all the derivative of the first, times the second left alone, so cosine of 2t cubed, plus the first left alone, the constant will already be there, leave the first alone, and then the derivative of the second will bring down the 3, leave the inside alone to the power, subtract 1 from it, and now multiply by the derivative of the inside. Derivative of cosine is negative sine, 2t, and then the multiply by the inside of that to complete the double chain rule. That'll give us a 2. In the next step here, I'm going to multiply all of the constants. So I have a 3, I have a 4, and I have a 2. 3 times 4 is 12, times that 2 will be a 24. We can put that in the front. So we will have 24. We have, looks like 3 powers of sine. So I will write that as sine cubed of 2t. I have no need to write it as quantity to a power anymore. That's only for the derivative. Now I can write it back to sine cubed 2t. And I have 1 plus 3 more, a total of 4 powers of cosine. Cosine to the fourth of 2t. Now in this next term, the constants, I have a 3, I have a 3, I have a negative that does multiply with everything else, and then a 2. 3 times 3 is a 9, times the negative will be negative 9, and then times the 2 will be negative 18. So negative 18. I have 4, 1 more, 5 powers of sine. So sine to the fifth of 2t. And I also have 2 powers of cosine, so cosine squared 2t. Okay, so now that I've done that, the next thing to do is start factoring this. Let's begin with the constants. We have a 24 and we have an 18. We can factor a 6. So f prime of t equals to 6 times. Taking out a 6, we'll leave a 4. Sine cubed of 2t, cosine to the fourth of 2t, and then minus a 3 after factoring out to 6. Sine to the fifth of 2t, and cosine squared of 2t. We can now factor out powers of the trig functions. So f prime of t will equal 6 times. Now looking at the powers of trig functions, I'll start with sine. And I have in the first term 3 powers of sine, in the second term 5 powers of sine, we can factor out the lower of the two. That'll be 3 powers of sine, so sine cubed of 2t. And remember that factoring means division. It's dividing out of there. And dividing means subtracting exponents. So we're going to take the exponents that are in there and subtract 3 from them. Well, if you take 3 away from 3, it's a 0. Anything raised to 0 is a 1. So all that goes away. And we'll take away 3 of these, leaving 2 behind. So there's what we should have left over. So it will be 4 cosine to the 4th of 2t minus 3 sine squared 2t, and then cosine squared 2t. Now I'm going to factor out powers of cosine as well. So I have 6 sine cubed of 2t. And then looking at the powers of cosine, I have 4 powers in this term and I have 2 powers in this term. It looks like we can take out 2 powers, the lower of the two numbers. So cosine squared 2t. If we take out 2 powers, again, subtraction, that will leave 2 left over here, and it will take all of those away. So that will give us 4 cosine squared of 2t minus 3 sine squared of 2t. And now it's fully factored. Now there is no identity for cosine squared and sine squared when they have different coefficients in front of them. We have the 4 with the cosine squared and the negative 3 with the sine squared, so that will not be a Pythagorean trig identity or anything like that. So we will leave them in this order here. This is the fully factored version, f prime of t. 6 sine cubed of 2t cosine squared of 2t times the quantity 4 cosine squared 2t minus 3 sine squared 2t.